Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Worth It Then, Worth It Now, a side project that I run over here on this channel where I have a look at games of yesteryear. I mean, things that aren't necessarily in season or in vogue at the moment, but I think they deserve a bit more of a shout out, something to return to and have a look at, and generally I'll try and line this up with a sale. So say we're actually looking at the Crust, which isn't exactly old. In fact, we looked at it on the main channel a year ago, almost to the day. It's in early access, so it's still ongoing development, but we're a year removed, and I've been thinking about it recently because it came back up in my feed. It seems that they've had some pretty major updates in the past week or so to some of the, let's say, end game or longer form stuff I'm not really up to yet. New Horizons update, things like outposts, that sort of stuff. But regardless, all of this aligns really well. There's a Steam Automation Fest sale on at the moment, so we might be covering a bunch of automation games this week on this channel. We'll see. But that's how we get where we are now. That's the Swiss cheese aligning for me to have a look at the Crust. And what do we think so far? It still holds up. I was still very impressed with what I looked at in the beginning. It's hard to tell huge differences, but this is, again, just an opportunity for me to shout out something that sits well within my wheelhouse and is still quite promising and still well and truly under development. Hasn't been abandoned or anything like that. So if I had to give examples of what this is, what does it bring to the table? It is a marrying of something like Surviving Mars. There's actually a lot of mechanics in there that seem quite similar, like drone management, especially in the early game, setting it up before you bring people on. So it has that initial setup onboarding that you see in that game. It also has aspects of things like Steam World Build, where you have a split level above and below ground. So, you're setting up solar panels and batteries on the surface, launch bays, and below the surface it's more of a mining operation, carving out things. Again, Steam World Build-esque, another great game you should absolutely check out if you've slept on it, which in turn draws inspiration from, the dungeon keepers of yesteryear, and you can see that here, carving out the regolith underground. But all of that is married with one of my favorite modern emergent genres, which are these narrative-heavy colony sim type games, really pioneered from something like Frostpunk. Ixion's another real great example of success, and this sits a bit closer to Ixion in a way. Well, at least, thematically it's a space thing. You're set up as a corporation, basically just getting your foot in the door as part of the mining operation that seems to be happening as the core sci-fi advance in this universe on the moon. We've got space elevators, all sorts of edge of futurism technology. It all kicks off with a tutorial. You've got this horrible Karen bitch in your ear talking to you, and they haven't changed her or patched her or anything like that. She's just miserable and bites the head off some poor miner, but let's go sisterhood. You go get that girl. So after making a terrible first impression by attacking the locals that already work the moon and are miserable and want to get out of the mines and go home, an emergency happens, straight out of the tutorial, prologue, whatever you want to call it. It's only like 15-20 minutes. It's actually pretty quick and punchy. It's very cool. But before you know it, an asteroid's hit the moon, and it's actually hit some pretty critical infrastructure. So they kind of institute a martial law on the moon and umbrella requisition everyone to come together to lend support. So it creates crisis, it creates impetus once you've got a grasp of the, what you can do and how you build production chains research, which is all pretty standard stuff. So there's back and forth between talking heads, and again, I've only just dunked back in to pick up some B-roll and refamiliarize so as to shout this out and put it on your radar. But there's corporate maneuvering as well, because all of a sudden all this resources that we're being sending back to Earth is stopped, and that creates an in for the corporate division of the company that you represent. So you're kind of juggling that, and that manifests gameplay wise in filling contracts. So I was setting that up, but you wire all your buildings together, you research things like conveyor belts, and it has a really clever way of dealing with regolith and slag waste, and how, generally speaking, to get the product that you want, refined ore or something like that, there's a lot of byproduct crap that gets in the way along the way, and then trying to use that and make the most of waste resources becomes part of the loop, which I think is very clever and something you don't particularly see that often. It's usually just straight efficiency. And as memory serves, as further on you go, you're going to start doing like expeditions around the moon and that. So it is one of those things that it does actually drip feed you new mechanics at a steady rate, where your vehicles are going to be getting caught out in the dark side of the moon and having to wait to recharge their panels before they can get going again, re-establishing contact with other bases, and at a certain point bringing people in as well. That's actually a fairly mid to late game component, surprisingly so. But yeah, look, it was cool to dip back in and have a look at this and see where it's at. And apart from, a particularly unpleasant side character, but they take her foil away from her, right? The dude that she doesn't like presumably got hit by the asteroid and blew up. So, now she's gone back to being nice because she has to just talk to you only. So that problem solves itself fairly quickly. But beyond that general cattiness, the game here is actually really solid. I'm really impressed. I like the soundtrack. I mean, it's generic, but it works fine enough. You don't seem to spend a lot of time on the surface, at least in the early going. It is very much more focused subsurface, underground, doing mining operations, but that makes sense. One of the cool things is the research tree. There seems to be 3 disciplines, blue, green, and orange, but they all vaguely represent different spheres of research. So like the orange, for example, is probably your core one, refineries, that sort of technology. Whereas green is a little bit more in the social sciences, I think it might even be called, so researching market access, that's what green would be. Living quarters, things like that, more human-centric stuff. And then blue, I think, is a bit more logistics, or they might even call it fundamentals. So, researching a launch pad. And the game will warn you, hey, you're wasting research. And what you figure out very quickly is, even though you queue things up one after the other, the game will still process the research points in parallel. So let's just say you've got a bunch of brown research stuff in the queue. It will still trigger that you're wasting resources or research because you're not using any of your green or blue research income that you presumably have, which that fluctuates as a reward for doing missions, etc. You're sort of getting outsourced research contribution from third parties. So in your queue, you kind of want all 3 of those research types being chipped away at. It's a little confusing at first, and it probably could be telegraphed a little bit better, but once you get your head around it, you just got to make sure that all 3 are in demand in your research queue. And if it's not working, like, say there's something that uses blue and green research, because as you go along it becomes multidisciplinary, and let's say it's fully researched the green component of that mixed research item, the game will still trigger, hey, you're wasting research, so you can go in there and triage it and put something green on the back of the queue as well. So you might find that you're researching the 4th thing down by accident, but it's the best way to make sure you're getting the use out of all of your research. It's novel, right? It's clever. It does work once you get the hang of it. It's nice to see something different. Anyway, roundly, I was impressed when I looked at this a year ago. I'm still happy with it and the progress that's going along, and for my part, very happy to recommend checking it out, especially if you do enjoy that kind of subgenre niche that we've seen more and more releases come into, the narrative colony builder. Synergy's another great one that we looked at earlier this year. So definitely, worth checking out, at least wish listing it, but it's on sale at the moment if you want to get around it and support it, if that sort of thing is what you're interested in. Anyway, team, I might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.